Alrighty, today we have the new Jefftron Scylla HPA for the V2. Have here the Polarstar F2 in an old LDX box. We'll get this out of here. A large harness that won't be needed again. Now you got to remember, cut these wires, cut them a little bit longer. Being a gel blaster, we got mag terminals. And then remove the trigger board. Then I'm not going to need the safety lockout anymore, as the Scylla has a electronic safety. Let's clean this up. Alright, so we're getting rid of having to have these two boards with a manual control. Putting in the Scylla. I know I pronounced that wrong probably, but that is what it is. Use these stickers on your selector, and there's an optical sensor on the back that just reads the amount of light reflected. Which is a really handy thing because you can actually adjust the point where it switches between safe and semi and also auto. White towards the back. Wrap them round. Make sure you stick them down nice and keep it channel clear there so it actually slides in the box. And fit that in. Time to put the board in. Only 2 wires being for the battery, and then we'll add the terminals on later. And then in this little box you'll find the little clamshell magnet holder and a bunch of screws. Start with a little black one with a decent sized flange on it. It's obviously the one to hold the board. Make sure it's snug but not too tight. Still wiggles a tiny bit so it's not too tight. Alright, a little trick I like to do is mark a reference on where the optical sensor is. I know that the black and white line for 50% is where the ridge is. Then I'll line up at the back there in the center, which would be semi, and it's perfect. And we mount the magnet holder onto the trigger. Uses 2 screws, and there's a tab at the back that locks into the wraparound bar. Get them in nice and firm, and then this one here just puts tension on it so it doesn't move around. That's it. Pop it in there. Make sure it moves freely and doesn't touch the board. Alright, now to pair it back up. Lay these cables where I need them roughly. I've put a pin in at the back. Then I'll chop them just the tiniest bit longer. And the best thing here to do is just tin the ends. And using a nice fine point on the iron, we just want to put a little bit of solder on the pads, making sure that you get the pads hot enough that the solder wicks to all the edges so you got a nice good join. Now I just use a pair of tweezers because it's actually pretty tight getting in there. And just ever so gently melt her in, soldering them up. Positives at the top, negatives at the bottom. Alright, all nice and stuck down. And then we'll see here, the poppet being the bottom solenoid on it. Any trigger board would normally go to the top. However, on this, it's logical. The poppet goes to the bottom for the poppet, and the nozzle goes to the top for the nozzle. Same as the solenoid orientation. Put a pin in here for now. Trigger in. These LDX boxes have a plate at the bottom there for the threads. Pin out. Get it together. Once it's together, just as you're putting it in, make sure that it doesn't pinch the wires, and then make sure the trigger doesn't have very little movement side to side. If it does, you can just put a small shim in there. You don't want it to be tight, but you don't want it to move side to side, being a magnet and a Hall effect sensor for the trigger. If you got side to side movement, you can actually end up having, if you set a hair trigger, the blaster to fire when just resting your finger on the side of the trigger. Alright, box is all screwed together. Just encourage these wires back to where they should be. And let's get it in a frame. This one, I actually have a shim that I printed. If you don't use that, when you do up the rear screw, it pulls the gearbox back, lifting the front up. The nozzle doesn't align properly. Snug fit, yeah, it could Dremel it out, but then there's not a lot of plastic underneath the heads of the screws, so I'd rather fight with it than have a weak grip. Then we do up these screws. I know it's probably overkill, but I run 4. Oh, better put the trigger pin in. Yep. And do all these up. Alright, battery wire through the stock. Or buffer tube, if you will. Alright, throw a battery in here. Now there's no fire control unit in there, I can use a half decent sized battery. A few more amps for the magazine. And then here we go on the app. Set the selector, calibration. There we go, it's registering 31%. Save that. Then we're on to semi. There we go, 66%. Save that, and then onto auto. There we go. And now let's test it on the readout. It was a little bit too quick to go into auto from semi, as you can see here. So that's why in the app there, as you saw on the screen recording, and I'll show you here, just turn it up a bit. So that separation point is closer to auto than it is to semi. Trigger sensitivity, let's rate it, let's go adjust it. So you got to press this button here to get it to fire while you're actually testing. But then you can set quite a low sensitivity, or should I say high, and then a much further pull. And that little green line there, you'll note is your reset point. Get a good little live readout. Plenty of information. Then over here in the settings, you've got tech lock, so you can actually lock out certain features if it's for a customer or even just a field, and you can show them that it's locked out. Give it a test here because I use the output for the mag terminals. This is on a 10 millisecond time, and you can turn it all the way up to 1. Pull the trigger, and it keeps running. Alright, put it together and I'll give it a test through the chrono. Now this here is a spreadsheet of the chrono results, all using the exact same gels, same mag, everything's the same. What I found was that the variation between maximum and minimum speeds on the semi-automatic between the Polarstar and the Jefftron were negligible. However, as you can see, the variation between maximum and minimum speeds on the Polarstar 58.9, whereas the Scylla was only 34. I mean, take that as you will, but I do feel that's a pretty good indication of how repeatable the cycle of the solenoids is, and Jefftron being able to do that more consistently is pretty awesome.